Everyone. Welcome again to another edition of Lunchtime Storytime. As you can see, I have gotten a brand new HD webcam, which should make it even easier for us to read books together, including today's book, The Day the Crayons Quit by Daywalt. This one is a really fun story, so I hope that you enjoy it. And then, of course, afterwards we will read from Paddington as usual. But I hope that the upgrade in camera equipment makes it easier for you to see the pictures when I read. So, The Day the Crayons Quit by Daywalt. Pictures by Oliver Jeffers. One day in class, Duncan went to take out his crayons and found a stack of letters with his name on them. Hey Duncan, it's me, Red Crayon. We need to talk. You make me work harder than any of your other crayons. All year long, I wear myself out coloring fire engines, apples, strawberries, and everything else that's red. I even work on holidays. I have to color all the Santas at Christmas and all the hearts on Valentine's Day. I need a rest. Your overworked friend, Red Crayon. Dear Duncan, all right, listen. I love that I'm your favorite crayon for grapes, dragons, and wizards' hats, but it makes me crazy that so much of my gorgeous color goes outside the lines. If you don't start coloring inside the lines soon, I'm going to completely lose it. Your very neat friend, Purple Crayon.
Dear Duncan, I'm tired of being called light brown or dark tan because I am neither. I am beige and I am proud. I'm also tired of being second place to Mr. Brown Crayon. It's not fair that Brown gets all the bears, ponies, and puppies, while the only things I get are turkey dinners, if I'm lucky, and wheat. And let's be honest, when was the last time you saw a kid excited about coloring wheat? Your beige friend, Beige Crayon.
Duncan, Gray Crayon here. You're killing me. I know you love elephants, and I know that elephants are gray, but that's a lot of space to color in all by myself. And don't even get me started on your rhinos, hippos, and humpback whales. You know how tired I am after handling one of those things. Such a big animal. Baby penguins are gray too, and pebbles. How about one of those once in a while to give me a break? Your very tired friend, Gray Crayon. Dear Duncan, you color with me, but why? Most of the time, I'm the same color as the page you are using me on, white. If I didn't have a black outline, you wouldn't even know I was there. I'm not even in the rainbow. I'm only used to color snow or to fill in empty spaces between other things. And it leaves me feeling, well, empty. We need to talk. Your empty friend, White Crayon. Hi, Duncan. I hate being used to draw outside of the outline of the thing. Things that are colored in by other colors, all of which think they're brighter than me. It's not fair when you use me to draw a nice beach ball and then fill in the colors of the ball with all the other crayons. How about a black beach ball once in a while? It's that too much to ask? Your friend, Black Crayon. Dear Duncan, as Green Crayon, I am writing for two reasons. One, to say that I like my work. Loads of crocodiles, trees, dinosaurs, and frogs. I have no problems and wish to congratulate you on a very successful coloring things green career so far. The second reason I write to you is for my friends Yellow Crayon and Orange Crayon, who are no longer speaking to each other. Both crayons feel they should be the color of the sun. Please settle this soon, because they're driving me, the rest of the crayons, crazy. Your happy friend, Green Crayon. Dear Duncan, Yellow Crayon here. I need you to tell Orange Crayon that I am the color of the sun. I would tell him, but we are no longer speaking. And I can prove I'm the color of the sun, too. Last Tuesday, you used me to color in the sun on your Happy Farm coloring book. In case you've forgotten, it's on page 7. You can't miss me. I'm shining down brightly on a field of yellow corn. Your pal and the true color of the sun, Yellow Crayon. Dear Duncan, I see Yellow Crayon already talked to you, the big whiner. Anyway, could you please tell Mr. Tattletale that he is not the color of the sun? I would, but we're no longer speaking. We both know I am clearly the color of the sun because on Thursday you used me to color the sun on both the Monkey Island and the Meet the Zookeeper pages in your Day at the Zoo coloring book. Orange, you glad I'm here? Your pal, and the real color of the sun, Orange Crayon. Dear Duncan, it has been great being your favorite color this past year, and the year before, and the year before that. I have really enjoyed all those oceans, lakes, rivers, raindrops, rain clouds, and clear skies. But the bad news is that I am so short and stubby, I can't even see over the railing in the crayon box anymore. I need a break. Your very stubby friend, Blue Crayon. Duncan. Okay, listen here, kid. You have not used me once in the past year. It's because you think I am a girly color, isn't it? Speaking of which, please tell your little sister that I said thank you for using me to color her Little Princess coloring book. I think she did a fabulous job of staying inside the lines. Now, back to us. Could you please use me sometime to color the occasional cowboy? Or monster? Or use a splash of color? Your unused friend, Pink Crayon. Hey, Duncan, it's me, Peach Crayon. Why did you peel off my paper wrapper? Now I am naked and too embarrassed to leave the crayon box. I don't even have any underwear. How would you like to go to school naked? I need some clothes. Help! Your naked friend, Peach Crayon. Well, poor Duncan just wanted to color, and of course, he wanted his crayons to be happy. And that gave him an idea. When Duncan showed his teacher his new picture, she gave him an A for coloring and an A+ for creativity. The end. And there is a sequel to this that is on the way in the mail, so I will read that when it comes. So, now we have a chapter from the Paddington Treasury. Guys, we are so close to being done with this book. This is pretty impressive. So we have read 196 pages together, and we only have this many pages left. So we are more than halfway through the book. Very exciting. And today we have chapter 20. Everything comes to those who wait. Oh boy. Guys! Yay, so exciting. Live reading. Oi! I think it's the man. Dogs. Or maybe it's a lawnmower. I don't know. I'm just going to read and hope that you guys can hear me. Wendy! Wendy, come here. Hush! Okay. We're going to try this again. And now, yeah, got to get back in autofocus. Okay. Everything comes to those who wait. Mrs. Bird gave a groan as the sound of several voices raised in song, followed almost immediately by a sharp rat-tat-tat on the front door, echoed down the hall. Buddy. Not again, she said, putting down her sewing. That's the 5th lot of carol singers in half an hour. I shall be glad when Christmas is here. I'll go, said Mr. Brown grimly. I should be careful what you say, Henry, warned Mrs. Brown. Don't forget Paddington's doing the same thing. Mr. Brown paused at the lounge door. What? He exclaimed. Paddington's out carol singing? You don't mean to say you let him go? He seemed very keen on the idea, replied Mrs. Brown. Jonathan and Judy are with him, so he should be all right. I think they're collected for some kind of party, broke in Mrs. Bird, coming to her rescue. It's all rather secret. Well, I hope whoever they are, they're not relying on Paddington's efforts for their Christmas entertainment, said Mr. Brown, feeling in his pocket. Otherwise, they're in for a pretty bleak time. Have you ever heard him sing? He went out by himself the other evening before Jonathan and Judy came home for the school holidays, said Mrs. Brown, and he did quite well considering. 2 bananas, a button, and some French francs, replied Mr. Brown, and the bananas looked as though they had seen better days. I wouldn't say singing was exactly his strong point, agreed Mrs. Brown reluctantly, but he's been practicing quite hard up in his room just lately. There's no need to tell me that, remarked Mr. Brown feelingly. He had me out of bed twice last night. I thought it was the cats. He turned to go as once again the familiar strains of Good King Wenceslas filled the air, and then his face brightened as a sudden thought struck him. I suppose, he said, it is one way of getting our own back. Had they been able to overhear the last remark, not only Paddington, but both Jonathan and Judy would have been most upset. But fortunately, for the sake of peace in the Browns' household, they were much too far away at that moment, and in any case, they had more important problems to occupy their minds. In particular, there was the matter of the amount they had been able to collect from their evening's work. 82 pence, said Jonathan bitterly as he shone his flashlight into the cardboard box which they'd been using for the takings. A measly 82 pence. It's not too bad, said Judy, considering that only 6 people have answered the door. They can't all have been out, said Jonathan. I wish we'd started our school holidays earlier. The trouble is everyone's getting fed up by now. I reckon we've left it a bit late. Perhaps we could say we're collecting for next Christmas, said Paddington hopefully. It had been Paddington's idea to collect some money for the annual children's party at the hospital, and he was beginning to feel a bit guilty about the whole affair, especially as they had set themselves a target of £10. Judy squeezed his paw. I don't think they'd be very pleased if we said that, she said. Never mind. We'll think of something. We mustn't give up now. Suppose we all separate, said Jonathan thoughtfully. If we do that, we ought to collect 3 times as much. We needn't go far away, he added, reading Judy's thoughts. In fact, we really needn't lose sight of each other. Paddington can have the flashlight, then he can signal if he wants anything. All right, said Judy reluctantly. She glanced at the surrounding houses. I'll take that one on the corner. I'll have a go at the one over there with the Christmas tree in the window, exclaimed Jonathan. Which one are you going to do, Paddington? Paddington considered the matter for a moment as he peered round at all the houses. I think I'd like to try that one over there, he announced, pointing toward an imposing-looking house standing slightly apart from the rest, from which there came the distinct sounds of a party in full swing. Come on, then, exclaimed Jonathan impatiently. We shan't get anywhere if we don't make a start. We'll meet there in half an hour. Don't forget, called Judy, if you get into any trouble, signal with the flashlight. Send an SOS, shouted Jonathan. 3 short flashes, then 3 long ones, and 3 short ones to follow. After testing his flashlight carefully in order to make sure it was working, Paddington hurried up the path towards the front door of the house he had chosen, cleared his throat several times, and then knocked loudly on the front door. He wasn't the sort of bear who believed in taking too many chances, and with so much noise going on inside the house, he didn't want to knock after he'd sung his carol and then find that no one had heard him. He opened his mouth and was about to launch into Hark the Herald Angels Sing, when to his surprise the door suddenly opened and a lady stood framed in the light from the hall. "Thank goodness you've come," she explained. "I was beginning to get quite worried. I'm Mrs. Smith Cholmley," she added as she opened the door wider and motioned Paddington to enter. Paddington raised his hat politely as he stepped into the hall. "Thank you very much," he exclaimed. "I'm Paddington Brown." For some reason, the welcoming expression on Mrs. Smith Cholmley's face began to fade. "Have you done much waiting?" she asked. "Oh, no," said Paddington, looking round with interest. "I've only just got here." "I mean, have you had any previous experience of waiting?" said Mrs. Smith Cholmley. Paddington considered the matter for a moment. "I had to wait for a bus the other day when Mrs. Bird took me out shopping," he said thoughtfully. Mrs. Smith Cholmley gave a rather high-pitched laugh. "Mr. Bridges at the agency said waiters were a bit short this year," she remarked, looking down at Paddington. "But I didn't think he meant... I thought he meant they were hard to find. That is..." Her voice trailed away. "Oh, well, at least they've sent someone," she continued brightly, avoiding Paddington's gaze. "We're having a little dinner party, and it's long past time to serve the first course. You'd better go straight to the kitchen and see Vladimir. He's beside himself." "Vladimir's beside himself?" exclaimed Paddington, looking most surprised. "He's the chef," explained Mrs. Smith Cholmley, "and if he doesn't get some help soon, I'm sure he'll do something nasty with his chopper. He was looking very gloomy the last time I saw him." She glanced down at Paddington's paw. "Let me take your flashlight. I'm sure you won't want that." "I think I'll keep it, if you don't mind," said Paddington firmly. "I may want to send some signals." "Just as you wish," said Mrs. Smith Cholmley, giving him a strange look. She led the way down a long corridor and then paused before a door at the end as she opened her handbag. "Here's your £10. "My £10? Paddington's eyes nearly popped out of his head as he stared at the crisp new banknote in his paw. "That's what I usually pay," said Mrs. Smith Cholmley, "but I'd like you to start right away." "Thank you very much," said Paddington, still hardly able to believe his good fortune. £10 seemed a great deal of money to pay for a carol, even if it was nearly Christmas, and he hastily put the note into the secret compartment of his suitcase, in case Mrs. Smith Cholmley changed her mind when she discovered he only knew one verse. As Paddington stood up, opened his mouth, and the first few notes of Hark the Herald Angels Sing ran through the hall, the colour seemed to drain from Mrs. Smith Cholmley's face. "Oh, that's all I need!" she cried, putting her hands to her ears. "A singing waiter!" Paddington broke off in the middle of his opening chorus. "A singing waiter?" he said, looking most upset. "I'm not a singer. I'm a bear." Mrs. Smith Cholmley gave a shudder. "I can tell that," she said, opening the kitchen door. "And I shall certainly have something to say to Mr. Bridges about it in the morning. In the meantime, you'd better start earning your money. Everyone's absolutely ravenous." Without waiting for a reply, she pushed Paddington through the door and hastily closed it behind him. "Ha!" Paddington jumped as a figure in white overalls and a tall white hat rose from behind a pile of saucepans and advanced towards him. "So, you have come at last! Quick! Off with your duffel coat and out with your arms!" Paddington stood blinking in the strong white light of the kitchen, hardly able to believe his eyes, let alone his ears. In fact, he was so taken aback at the sudden strange turn of events that before he knew what was happening, he found that his duffel coat had been removed, and he was standing on his with his arms outstretched, while the man in white overalls balanced a row of bowls on each of them. "Quick! Quick!" shouted Vladimir, snapping his fingers. "Get cracking with your mulligatonis!" "Get cracking with my mulligatonis?" Paddington repeated carefully, finding his voice at last, but hardly daring to breathe in case any of the bowls overbalanced. "The soup!" said Vladimir impatiently. "It's getting cold, and on such short arms it's difficult to balance so much." Paddington blinked several times to make sure he wasn't dreaming, and then closed his eyes in order to count up to 10. But before he had time even to reach 2, he found himself being bundled back out of the kitchen, and when he opened them again, he was standing outside yet another door, behind which could be heard the chatter of voices. "Quick!" said Vladimir, giving Paddington a firm push. In here!
A buzz of excitement broke out in the room as Paddington entered, and several of the guests applauded. "What a delightful idea, Mabel," said one lady, "having a bear for a waiter. Trust you to think up something unusual." Mrs. Smith Cholmondeley gave a sickly smile.
"Oh, it really wasn't my idea," she said truthfully. "It just happened, but it makes a nice change."
She eyed Paddington warily as he arrived at the table with his load of bowls, but to her relief, apart from the fact that he was breathing rather heavily down the neck of one of her guests who happened to be in the way, there was little she could find fault with.
"I think we'd better give you a hand," she said hastily when nothing happened. "We don't want any nasty accidents."
"Thank you very much," said Paddington gratefully, as one by one the various diners relieved him of his burden. "It's a bit difficult with paws." "Talking of paws," said the man Paddington had been standing behind, "you've got one of yours in my soup."
"Oh, that's all right," said Paddington politely. "It isn't very hot."
The man eyed the bowl distastefully. "May I give you a tip?" he asked.
"Oh, yes, please," said
Paddington eagerly. Now that he was getting used to the idea of being a waiter, he was beginning to enjoy himself, and after giving his paw a hasty lick in order to remove some soup which had accidentally overflowed, he held it out hopefully. "Don't carry quite so much next time," said the man sternly, as he helped himself to a roll. "Then it won't happen." Mrs. Smith Cholmondeley gave a nervous giggle as she caught sight of the expression on Paddington's face.
"I think I should see how Vladimir is getting on with the next course," she said quickly.
Paddington gave the man with the roll one final long, hard stare, and then, after collecting several empty soup dishes, he made his way towards the door. The carol singing, not to mention the waiting, had made him feel more than usually hungry, and Mrs. Smith Cholmondeley's words reminded him of the fact that during his brief spell in the kitchen he'd noticed some very interesting smells coming from beneath the lids of Vladimir's saucepans. Although he still wasn't entirely sure what was happening, Paddington didn't want to run the risk of it all coming to an end before he had had time to investigate the matter. What with one thing and another, serving the first course had taken rather longer than he had expected, and he hurried back down the corridor as fast as his legs would carry him. To his surprise, when he got back to the kitchen, Vladimir was no longer dressed in white. His chef's hat was lying in a crumpled ball in the middle of the floor, and Vladimir himself was standing by the back door clad in a black overcoat and muffler. "I may go back to Poland," he announced gloomily when he caught sight of Paddington.
"Oh dear," said Paddington. "I hope nothing's wrong."
"Everything is wrong," said Vladimir. He thumped his chest. "I, Vladimir, who have cooked for the crowned heads of Europe, I, who have had princes wait while I add the final touches to my creations, I, Vladimir, am reduced to this. Waiting. All the time I am kept waiting." He waved his hand disconsolately in the air. "My soup, she is cold. My entrecotes, they're cold."
"Your entrecotes are cold," said Paddington, looking most upset.
Vladimir nodded. "My beautiful steak, ruined." He pointed towards a grill laden with slowly congealing pieces of meat. "I had to take them from the stove or they would have been burned to a cinder." He reached out and clasped Paddington's paws. "They are yours, my friend. In the saucepans you will find the vegetables. You may serve as you think fit. I, Vladimir, no longer care. Goodbye, my friend, and good luck." Worn out by his long speech, Vladimir paused by the back door, waved his hand dramatically in the air, and then disappeared from view, leaving Paddington rooted to the spot in astonishment. But if Paddington was upset by the sight of Vladimir's sudden departure, Mrs. Smith Cholmondeley looked even more upset when, sometime later, she caught sight of her steak. By the time he'd gotten around to serving all the various vegetables and carried all the plates into the dining room, things had gone from bad to worse. Even putting some of the pieces of steak in an electric toaster hadn't helped matters, particularly as several of them had popped out and fallen on the floor before he'd had a chance to catch them. Looking at his offering, Paddington had to admit that he really didn't fancy it much himself, and he felt pleased he'd taken time off to have his own snack before serving the others. "If there's anything wrong with the baked Alaska," hissed Mrs. Smith Cholmondeley, endeavoring to glare at Paddington with one half of her face and smile at her guests with the other, "I shall insist on Vladimir giving me my money back." "Baked Alaska," she said through her teeth as she saw the look of surprise on Paddington's face. "It's a special surprise for my guests, and I want it to be absolutely perfect." If Paddington's spirits sank as he made his way slowly back down the corridor to the kitchen, they fell still more during the next few minutes as he peered hopefully at first one cookbook and then another. Although Mrs. Smith Cholmondeley had only spoken of asking the chef for his money back, he had a nasty feeling that when it came down to it, and she found out that Vladimir had disappeared, his own £10 might not be too safe.
Mrs. Smith Cholmondeley had a large collection of cookbooks from many different parts of the world, but not to one of them so much as mentioned the dish he was looking for. It was as he closed the last of the books that Paddington caught sight of a nearby, low-hanging shelf which he hadn't noticed before, and as he did so he gave a sudden start, for there, right in front of his eyes, was a row of tins, one of which was labeled with the very words he'd been looking for. Hardly daring to close his eyes in case the tin disappeared, Paddington spent the next few minutes hastily making his preparations. First, he turned the knob on the oven to read high, and then he looked around for a suitable dish. After carefully checking the thermometer to make sure the oven was hot enough, he emptied the contents of the tin into the dish and placed it inside the oven. Normally, the only thing Paddington had against cooking was the amount of time it took for anything to happen, but on this occasion, he didn't have long to wait. In fact, he had hardly had time to settle down on his suitcase and make himself comfortable before several whiffs of black smoke rose from the oven, and the pleased expression on his face was rapidly replaced by a look of alarm as a most unappetizing smell began to fill the kitchen. Hurrying across the room, he tore open the oven door, only to stagger back as a cloud of thick black smoke poured out. Holding his nose with one paw, he picked up his flashlight with the other and peered mournfully at the contents of the baking dish as it sizzled and bubbled inside the oven. Paddington was a hopeful bear at heart, but although Mrs. Smith Cholmondeley had definitely said she wanted to surprise her guests, he couldn't help feeling, as he trundled a cart laden with portions of his dessert down the corridor some while later, that his efforts might prove rather more surprising than she'd bargained for. Giving vent to a deep sigh, he took a firm grip of his flashlight as he tapped on the dining room door. Jonathan had told him to send out a distress signal if he was in trouble, and he had a nasty idea in the back of his mind that the moment to take this advice was not too far away. Mr. Brown stared at Paddington as if he could hardly believe his eyes. "Do you mean to say," he exclaimed, "that you actually served this Mrs. Smith Cholmondeley baked elastic?" Paddington nodded unhappily. "I found some rubber bands in a tin, Mr. Brown," he explained. "He didn't realize Mrs. Smith Cholmondeley had said baked Alaska," explained Judy. "That's just a sort of ice cream dish cooked in the oven." "It was just after that he sent his SOS," said Jonathan. "I'm not surprised," exclaimed Mrs. Bird. "It's a wonder some of the guests didn't send with one as well." "They were really jolly nice about it," said Judy. "When the real waiter turned up and they discovered Paddington had really only come to sing a carol, they made us all stay." "He'd met Vladimir on the way too," added Jonathan. "Vladimir?" said Mr. Brown. He was rapidly losing track of the conversation. "Who's Vladimir?" "The chef," explained Judy. "When he discovered the mistake, he came back after all, and he made some real baked Alaska, so everyone was happy." "We sang some carols afterwards," said Jonathan, "and we collected over £15. That means we've nearly reached our target." Judy gave a sigh. "The baked Alaska was super," she said dreamily. "I could eat some more." "So could I," said Jonathan. Paddington licked his lips. "I expect I could make you some if you like." "Mr. Brown," he exclaimed. "Not in my kitchen," said Mrs. Bird sternly. "I'm not having any young bear's elastic baked in my oven." She paused at the door. "Mind you," she added casually, "as it happens, we are going to have some ice cream for supper." "I must say, it sounds rather nice," said Mrs. Brown. Mr. Brown stroked his mustache thoughtfully. "I could toy with some myself," he agreed. "How about you, Paddington?" Paddington considered the matter for a moment. If one thing stood out above all others in his mind from the evening's adventure, it was the memory of Vladimir's baked Alaska, and he felt sure that an Alaska baked by Mrs. Bird would be nicer still. The Browns' housekeeper looked unusually pink about the ears as she raised her hand at the noisy approval which greeted Paddington as he gave voice to his thoughts. "Compliments are always nice," she said, "especially genuine ones. But if you ask me," she continued, pausing at the door, "bears' compliments are the nicest ones of all, and they certainly deserve the biggest helpings." The end. So I hope that this has worked. I think my video may have kicked out a minute ago. I have a new camera and it's giving me a little bit of trouble. But I hope that you have enjoyed the stories, and I will see you all tomorrow at roughly the same time. Bye!